You're leaving! Right now!
You should ask who I am first. Sir, it's an honor.
The rain had been falling over Red Valley since before sunrise, turning the parking lot outside Carter's Highway Grill into a gray sheet of water broken by oil stains, shallow puddles, and the trembling reflection of a red neon sign. At 8:17 that Monday morning, nearly every person inside the diner had stopped eating. Forks hovered above plates. Coffee cooled inside untouched cups. Even the old ceiling fan seemed too loud for the silence that had settled over the room. Through the wide front windows, they could see a tall black man standing alone beneath the rain. His name was Zaya Brooks. He was 69 years old, though the strength in his shoulders and the stillness in his posture made him appear younger from a distance. His faded military coat was dark with rainwater, one sleeve pulled crooked where someone had grabbed it. Coffee stained the left shoulder. Mud marked one knee of his pants. 3 men stood around him, but only one was smiling. Derek Whitmore, the 26-year-old son of Red Valley's police chief, wore the satisfied expression of a man who had never been required to imagine consequences. His 2 friends remained a few steps behind him, laughing less confidently now that Isaiah had risen from the wet pavement. Moments earlier, Derek had shoved him from behind and forced one of his knees against the ground. Isaiah had caught himself with one hand, preventing his face from striking the asphalt. He had not cursed. He had not swung back. He had simply remained there for one quiet second, breathing slowly as rain ran from his silver hair onto his cheek. That restraint had unsettled Derek more than resistance would have. "That's better," Derek said, raising his voice so the people inside could hear. "Now you're starting to understand how things work around here." Isaiah stood fully upright and brushed a small piece of gravel from his palm. His face held no obvious anger, but something in his eyes had changed. The warmth that had been there inside the diner was gone. What remained was focused, distant, and difficult to read. Derek noticed it. For the first time that morning, his smile tightened at the corners. "You should have stayed down," he added. Isaiah looked past him briefly, taking in the position of the parked vehicles, the diner entrance, the narrow service alley, and the 2 local patrol cars approaching from the opposite end of Main Street. The movement of his eyes was so subtle that Derek mistook it for nervousness. "Waiting for somebody?" Derek asked. "My father runs this town. Whoever you think is coming won't help you." Isaiah looked back at him. "I'm not waiting for help." His voice was low and even, forcing Derek to lean forward to hear him. "Then maybe you finally understand." "No," Isaiah replied. "I understand exactly what you are doing." The smile vanished from Derek's face. Inside the diner, Keisha Morgan held her phone beneath the edge of the counter, its camera aimed through the front window. Her thumb trembled against the screen. She had seen Derek intimidate customers before. She had watched Police Chief Calvin Whitmore turn complaints into warnings against the people who made them. But she had never seen anyone look at Derek the way Isaiah did. Not with fear, not with rage, but with a calm that made Derek appear smaller than he had 5 minutes earlier. Helen Carter stood beside the register, one hand pressed against her apron. She wanted to open the door. She wanted to tell Derek that Isaiah had done nothing wrong. Instead, memories of surprise inspections, permit threats, and unexplained fines held her in place. Her silence felt heavier than cowardice because she knew it had been practiced for years. Outside, Derek stepped closer and placed 2 fingers against Isaiah's chest. "Men like you come through towns like this and think the rules don't apply to you." Isaiah glanced at Derek's hand, then met his eyes again. "Which rule did I break?" Derek's jaw tightened. "Don't play smart with me. I sat in an empty booth. I ordered breakfast. I paid before the food arrived because your staff was told to question whether I could afford it. Then you ordered me to leave because you did not like seeing me in your seat." Derek's friends stopped laughing entirely. Isaiah's words were not loud, but each one landed with uncomfortable precision. "You made this about yourself," Derek said. "No," Isaiah answered. "You made it about my color before you knew my name." A flush spread across Derek's cheeks. He glanced toward the diner windows and realized everyone was watching. Humiliation, not reason, hardened his expression. You people always need to make yourselves the victim." The sentence carried the contempt of something even uglier left deliberately unsaid. Isaiah's face remained composed, though a small muscle moved once along his jaw. "And men like you," he said, "always believe restraint is the same thing as weakness." Derek grabbed the front of Isaiah's coat again. Isaiah did not move. He did not even look down at the fist twisted into the fabric. "Listen carefully," Isaiah continued. "Your greatest mistake is not that you chose the wrong man. It is that you believe there is a right man to treat this way." For half a second, doubt passed through Derek's eyes. Then the sound of heavy engines rolled in from the highway. It grew rapidly, deeper than the local patrol cars and too coordinated to be ordinary traffic. 4 black armored SUVs appeared around the bend, followed by 2 military transport vehicles carrying personnel in full tactical equipment. Tires cut through the rainwater as the convoy turned sharply into the diner parking lot. Derek released Isaiah's coat and took one uncertain step back. The vehicles stopped in a precise line. Doors opened almost at once. Uniformed soldiers stepped into the rain, scanning the property with disciplined attention. Derek's confidence returned in a thin, desperate imitation of itself. He straightened his jacket and moved forward as if he had arranged their arrival. "Good," he called. "You're right on time. I just detained a suspicious man near Fort Sterling." No one answered him. The rear door of the lead SUV opened. General Adrian Cross, a 4-star officer whose decisions carried weight far beyond Red Valley, stepped onto the pavement. He looked past Derek and saw the coffee stain, the torn sleeve, and the mud on Isaiah's knee. Shock crossed his face before professional control replaced it. Cross walked forward, stopped several feet from Isaiah, brought his heels together, and raised his hand in a formal salute. "Colonel Brooks, sir," he said. "We have been searching for you." The rain continued to fall, but the parking lot seemed to lose every other sound. Derek turned slowly toward the man he had just forced to his knee, and for the first time in his life, the name Whitmore offered him no protection at all. 45 minutes earlier, Red Valley had looked like the kind of American town people described as peaceful, without ever asking what that peace cost. The main street curved between low brick storefronts decorated with winter wreaths, polished flagpoles, and signs promising honest service. A white church steeple rose above the rooftops. The courthouse lawn had been trimmed so evenly that even the rain seemed unable to disturb it. Travelers passing through North Carolina saw a place where doors were unlocked early and waitresses remembered regular orders. The people who lived there understood something different. Red Valley was quiet because most residents had learned which questions were dangerous to ask. For 17 years, Police Chief Calvin Whitmore had controlled the town through favors that looked harmless until someone tried to refuse them. He rarely shouted in public. He preferred a steady voice, a firm handshake, and the suggestion that cooperation made life easier for everyone. Business owners who donated to the police association received friendly reminders before inspections. Those who declined were visited by fire officials, licensing officers, parking enforcement, and sometimes patrol officers who sat outside their stores long enough to discourage customers. Calvin called it responsible oversight. The merchants called it the cost of staying open. At Carter's Highway Grill, Helen Carter paid $600 every Monday morning into an envelope marked Community Safety Fund. No official receipt was ever provided. A uniformed officer usually collected it before lunch. Helen had once asked where the money went. 2 days later, the diner was cited for a storage shelf that had passed inspection for 12 years. She paid the fine, repaired the shelf, and never asked again. Her fear was not dramatic. It lived in small habits, checking the parking lot before speaking honestly, lowering her voice whenever a patrol car passed, and reminding employees that some customers were easier to satisfy than challenge. Keisha Morgan had worked at the diner for 4 years. She knew which regular wanted extra toast, which trucker needed decaf, and which customers expected to be treated as though entering the diner was a favor they had granted the staff. She also knew that black travelers were watched more closely. Helen sometimes asked Keisha to place their checks on the table before the food arrived. When groups of black customers entered wearing work clothes, Helen quietly counted the silverware afterward. White customers dressed the same way were welcomed with coffee before they sat down. No written policy required any of it. That was what made the pattern so difficult to confront. Every individual act could be dismissed as caution, coincidence, or misunderstanding. Together, they formed a message everyone could feel and no one wanted to name. Derek Whitmore had absorbed that message before he was old enough to understand its consequences. At 26, he had no position in the police department, yet he drove a city-owned SUV whenever he pleased and wore a jacket embroidered with the words Red Valley Public Safety Support. He used the phrase, "We handle things differently here," whenever someone challenged him. He had been involved in several incidents over the years: a fight outside a sports bar, a damaged motel room, a reckless driving complaint, and an argument with a delivery driver that ended with the driver leaving town before filing a statement. Each report changed after Calvin reviewed it. Witnesses became uncertain. Video quality became poor. Charges became misunderstandings. Derek learned the wrong lesson from every escape. He did not believe he had been forgiven. He believed he had been right. His favorite place in Carter's Highway Grill was booth number 3, a wide red vinyl seat near the front window. There was no reservation sign, no plaque, and no formal agreement. Derek had simply decided it belonged to him. He liked the booth because everyone entering the diner could see him there. It allowed him to watch the parking lot, wave at officers, and remind strangers that he was connected to the most powerful man in town. Helen normally kept the booth empty during the breakfast rush if she expected Derek to arrive. That Monday, the rain had delayed several employees, a delivery truck had arrived early, and the coffee machine had begun leaking before sunrise. In the confusion, Helen forgot to warn Keisha. At 7:42, Keisha wiped down booth 3 and placed a clean menu on the table. She did not consider it an act of defiance. It was simply an empty seat in a diner with customers waiting to be served. 10 minutes later, a faded dark green pickup rolled slowly into the parking lot. Its engine made a rough metallic sound before stopping near the edge of the property. A tall black man with silver hair stepped out and stood beside the truck for a moment, looking toward the highway as if calculating distance. He wore an old military coat with no visible rank, dark pants, and boots marked by wet road dust. He carried no luggage except a small black case held carefully in his left hand. Helen noticed him through the window. Her eyes moved from his coat to the truck and then to the case. She felt the familiar instinct to decide whether he might cause difficulty, though he had done nothing except close his truck door quietly. Keisha saw the same man and noticed something else. He waited for an older customer to exit before opening the diner door, then wiped the rain from his boots so he would not leave water across the floor. "Morning," Keisha said as he entered. The man gave her a tired but courteous smile. "Morning, table or counter?" He looked toward the window, then briefly touched his right knee as though it had stiffened during the drive. "A booth would be helpful if one is available." Keisha glanced across the room. Booth 3 was empty. Without hesitation, she picked up a menu and led him toward it. Behind the register, Helen looked up too late. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The man thanked Keisha, placed the black case beside him, and sat in the seat Derek Whitmore believed no one in Red Valley had the right to offer. The man seated in booth 3 was Colonel Isaiah Brooks, although nothing about his appearance invited anyone to guess the title. His military coat had been issued more than 20 years earlier. The cuffs were worn smooth, one pocket had been repaired by hand, and the name strip had been removed after his retirement. Isaiah kept it because it was warm, durable, and familiar. He had never understood the need to advertise accomplishments that had already cost enough. At 69, he moved with the measured care of someone who knew exactly where his body had been damaged and how much strength remained. A reconstructed right knee gave him trouble in cold weather. A narrow scar crossed the back of his left hand. His hearing was slightly weaker on one side after an explosion years earlier. None of those limitations made him fragile. They had simply taught him precision. Isaiah had spent most of his adult life in rooms where panic could kill people faster than weapons. He had led rescue teams, advised senior commanders, and entered places that official reports later described only as restricted operations. Younger soldiers told stories about his reflexes and endurance. Some of the stories were exaggerated, others were not. What separated Isaiah from men who enjoyed being feared was that he never confused capability with permission. He believed the more power a person possessed, the more carefully it had to be controlled. That belief was the reason General Adrian Cross had called him shortly after midnight. Isaiah had been asleep at his home outside Richmond when a secure telephone, one he had not expected to hear again, rang in the study. Cross did not waste time with ceremony. A former military intelligence specialist named Dr. Ethan Shaw had disappeared while inspecting a communications facility in the fictional Eastern European nation of Varsovia. The facility, Black Ridge Station, had been abandoned years earlier, but recently reactivated by a private security network. Ethan had discovered that the group was collecting encrypted military data and selling access to multiple buyers. Before he could leave, his transmission ended. Satellite images showed armed vehicles entering the station. Intelligence suggested Ethan would be transferred across the border within 36 hours. Isaiah knew the facility. Years earlier, he had helped assess its underground design during a joint security operation. He remembered a maintenance tunnel cut through the mountain, a secondary generator room beneath the east wing, and an old drainage route that never appeared on the final architectural plans. Cross had assembled an experienced rescue team, but maps alone would not tell them which corridors had been sealed or where the structure had weakened. He needed Isaiah's memory and judgment. Isaiah agreed to meet him at Fort Sterling before 9 that morning. He packed lightly, placed an old field notebook inside a black protective case, and left before dawn. The rain began near the state line. 20 miles from Fort Sterling, his pickup lost power and rolled onto the shoulder. Isaiah examined the engine, identified a damaged electrical connection, and decided it could be repaired but not safely in the rain. His secure phone had drained its battery while searching for a signal along the rural highway. He saw the neon sign of Carter's Highway Grill less than half a mile away and drove there slowly before the truck stopped completely. Inside the diner, he placed the black case beside him and connected his phone to the outlet beneath booth 3. Keisha approached with a coffee pot. "You look like you have had a long morning," she said. "It has been longer than planned." His voice was gentle, but his eyes briefly checked the front entrance, kitchen door, hallway, and reflection in the window. The habit was automatic. "Coffee? Black, please." Keisha filled the cup and handed him a menu. Before she could leave, Helen called her toward the register. Their conversation was quiet but not quiet enough. "Did you check whether he can pay?" Helen asked. Keisha's shoulders stiffened. He just sat down. "You know what I mean. We have had problems. With him, do not start this morning. Just bring the check first." Keisha returned, carrying a small paper slip and a card reader. Embarrassment softened her voice. "I'm sorry, we need to run a card before I place the order." Isaiah looked past her. At the next booth, 2 white construction workers were already eating, their checks nowhere in sight. He then looked back at Keisha. She seemed more ashamed than defensive. "Is this required for every customer?" he asked. Keisha hesitated. That hesitation answered him. Isaiah took out his card and placed it on the table. "Run it." She completed the transaction and returned the card. "I really am sorry." Isaiah studied her for a moment. "You did not create the rule." Relief entered her expression too quickly. Then he added, "But every time you obey an unfair rule without questioning it, you help someone else believe it is normal." The relief disappeared, replaced by a quieter discomfort. Isaiah did not speak cruelly. That made the words harder to dismiss. He ordered eggs, toast, and sliced potatoes. While Keisha entered the order, he opened the black case just enough to check the notebook, and a sealed envelope marked for General Cross. Helen noticed the case and watched him longer than she watched other customers. Isaiah saw her reflection in the window. He also noticed the patrol vehicle parked across the street, the camera above the register, and the handwritten sign near the kitchen reminding staff that Booth 3 should remain available on weekday mornings. He had lived long enough to recognize When a room operated under a rule no one was willing to explain. The diner door opened, bringing in cold air and the sound of laughter. Derek Whitmore entered with Trent Lawson and Kyle Mercer behind him. Derek removed his sunglasses, though the sky outside was nearly black with rain. He looked toward booth 3. The laughter stopped. His expression did not become surprised. It became offended. Isaiah lifted his coffee and took one slow sip, unaware of Derek's name but already certain that the man approaching his table believed the entire room belonged to him. Derek did not approach the booth immediately. He stopped beside the register and looked at Helen with the controlled disbelief of a man who expected someone else to correct an insult before he had to mention it. Helen's face lost color. "Derek," she said, forcing brightness into her voice, "I didn't know you were coming this early." Apparently, his eyes remained fixed on Isaiah. Trent and Kyle exchanged amused looks behind him. They had spent enough mornings with Derek to understand the ritual. Booth 3 was not valuable because it was comfortable. It was valuable because everyone knew to leave it empty. "You forget something," Derek asked Helen. "It has been busy. The weather. I did not ask about the weather." Keisha turned from the order station. "I seated him there." The other booths were full when he came in. 2 had since opened, but her explanation was true. Derek looked at her slowly. "You seated him there?" Keisha held his gaze for half a second, then lowered it. Isaiah watched the exchange without moving. The fear in the diner was not sudden. It had structure. Derek crossed the room and stopped beside the table. He did not introduce himself. "You need to move." Isaiah looked up from his coffee. "Is the booth reserved?" "It is now." "Was it reserved when I sat down?" Derek pulled the menu from the table and tossed it onto the empty seat opposite Isaiah. "Everybody around here knows this is my booth." Isaiah glanced toward the room. Several people had become deeply interested in their plates. "I am not from around here. That is obvious." The words were followed by a brief look at Isaiah's coat, skin, and worn truck outside. "There are tables near the kitchen for people passing through." Isaiah turned his eyes toward those tables. One was beside the restrooms. The other was near the service door where cold air entered whenever employees carried out trash. "I was seated here by the staff. The staff made a mistake. Then the staff can explain the policy." Derek's mouth tightened. He was accustomed to apologies, excuses, and nervous cooperation. Isaiah's calm questions denied him all 3. "What exactly are you doing near Fort Sterling?" Derek asked. "Eating breakfast." Trent laughed. Derek did not. "Where are you from?" "Virginia." "Which part?" Isaiah lifted the cup again. "Why does that concern you?" "Because we pay attention to strangers here." Derek leaned closer. "Especially strangers who show up near a military base carrying locked cases." Isaiah's eyes moved briefly to the black case at his side. "Do you ask every traveler the same questions?" "People who belong here do not need to be asked." A white salesman sitting at the counter had entered 10 minutes before Isaiah with a hard plastic equipment case. Derek had greeted him by name and never asked what it contained. Keisha noticed Isaiah look toward the salesman. She understood the comparison immediately. Derek continued, "Do you have identification? Are you a police officer?" "My father is the police chief." That was not my question. A few customers looked up. The faintest tension moved through Derek's face. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "I am sitting where I was placed, drinking coffee I paid for before it was served. You are questioning me about my identity, my vehicle, and my reason for entering a public diner. Tell me which part I made difficult." Derek placed both hands on the table. "Men like you come into decent towns and immediately start testing boundaries." Isaiah's gaze sharpened, though his voice remained controlled. "Men like me?" Helen stepped from behind the counter. "Derek, there are other booths. I can bring your coffee over there." He turned toward her so quickly she stopped. "I did not ask for another booth." Then he looked back at Isaiah. "You heard her move." Isaiah studied him with an expression that contained neither fear nor surprise. It held recognition. He had seen men build their identities around the obedience of others. They often mistook the first refusal for an attack. "You do not need the seat," Isaiah said. "You need everyone in this room to watch me give it to you." Derek's cheeks darkened. "Careful. Because I am black, because I am not from here, And because my coat looks old, you decided I should answer questions no one asked the white man at the counter. You decided my payment had to be verified before my meal. Now you need me to stand so the room can remember whose authority matters." The diner became still. Keisha stared at Isaiah, hearing her own shame described without being used against her. Helen looked toward the floor. Derek leaned down until his face was near Isaiah's. "You people walk into a place and turn every inconvenience into some accusation." The phrase was familiar, polished by repetition. "Maybe the problem is not how we treat you. Maybe the problem is that you refuse to understand where you fit." A small muscle moved in Isaiah's jaw. That was the only visible reaction. "A man's place is not assigned by your comfort," he said. Derek's voice dropped. "Get out of my booth, boy." The word landed differently because of Isaiah's age. It was not casual. It was chosen to reduce him. Trent smiled again, encouraged by the silence around them. Isaiah set the coffee cup down carefully. "I have been called many things by better men than you," he said. "None of them changed who I was." Derek's restraint broke. He reached across the table and struck the cup with the back of his hand. Coffee spilled across Isaiah's coat, and the cup shattered against the floor. Keisha stepped forward. "That is enough." Derek turned on her. "Stay out of this unless you want my father looking into how this place is run." Helen immediately caught Keisha's arm, not to silence her out of agreement, but from fear. Isaiah looked at the coffee spreading across the table, then at the broken pieces near his boots. He rose slowly. Derek took the movement as surrender and smiled. He did not understand that every person in the diner had just watched Isaiah give him one final opportunity to stop. Isaiah stood beside the booth with coffee darkening the front of his coat. He looked at the broken cup, then at Keisha. "No one was cut?" he asked. She shook her head. The question unsettled Derek. Most men he confronted either raised their voices or tried to retreat. Isaiah's first concern was whether anyone else had been hurt. Derek stepped between him and the aisle. "Now you are leaving." Isaiah reached toward the black case. Kyle moved quickly from behind Derek and placed a hand on it. "Leave that where it is." Isaiah stopped. His eyes shifted to Kyle's wrist, then to the angle of his shoulders. Kyle was larger than Derek but less confident. His balance rested too far forward. Trent had moved near the entrance, attempting to block the path while pretending he was only watching. In the reflective metal panel behind the counter, Isaiah could see Keisha sliding her phone beneath a stack of menus with the camera exposed. He could also see Helen reaching for the wall phone and then pulling her hand back when Derek glanced toward her. Isaiah absorbed all of it in a few seconds. "That case belongs to me," he said. "Then maybe we should see what is inside," Derek replied. "You have no authority to search it. Around here, I have enough." Derek grabbed the front of Isaiah's coat. The move was clumsy, driven by anger rather than control. Isaiah's body reacted before thought was necessary. His left hand turned slightly, catching Derek's wrist between thumb and palm. A small rotation would have forced the elbow down. A second movement could have placed Derek on the floor without serious injury. Isaiah applied only enough pressure to make Derek's fingers open. The entire exchange lasted less than a second. Derek stumbled back, staring at his own hand. Isaiah had not changed his breathing. Trent stopped smiling. Kyle released the case. Something passed between the three younger men, an instinctive awareness that they had misunderstood the person in front of them. Derek felt it too, but humiliation pressed harder than caution. "He attacked me," he announced. No one answered. "You grabbed him," Keisha said from behind the counter. Her voice shook, but she did not withdraw the statement. Derek looked toward her phone. "Are you recording this?" Keisha placed both hands on the counter. "The diner has cameras." It was not a direct answer. Derek turned back to Isaiah. "You think you are tough because you caught my wrist?" "No." Isaiah's gaze was level. "I think you are frightened because you finally touched someone you could not control." Derek lunged again. This time he reached for Isaiah's shoulder while Kyle moved behind him. Isaiah shifted half a step. Derek's hand passed through empty space, and Kyle nearly collided with him. Isaiah could have dropped both men before Trent crossed the aisle. He knew exactly where to strike to disable a knee, interrupt breathing, or break a grip. Years of training reduced the room to distance, timing, and consequence. Yet another calculation mattered more. Helen stood close enough to be knocked into the counter. A truck driver at the nearest table had a cane resting against his chair. Broken ceramic remained on the floor. If Isaiah responded at full speed, someone uninvolved could be injured. More importantly, Calvin Whitmore would receive exactly the image he needed. 3 local white men on the floor and a black stranger standing over them. Context would disappear before the first report was written. Isaiah raised both hands to shoulder level. "I am not resisting," he said loudly. His voice carried through the diner. "I have threatened no one. I have touched no one except to release an unlawful grip." Derek looked around and saw customers watching. He needed the room to see him regain control. "Take him outside," he told his friends. Kyle hesitated. "Derek, do it." Trent came from the doorway and reached for Isaiah's arm. Isaiah turned his head slightly. "Do not pull the injured shoulder," he said. Trent's hand paused. Derek misread the warning as weakness and seized the opposite sleeve. "Move." Isaiah looked at Keisha. Her phone lens remained visible beneath the menus. He then looked at Helen, whose eyes were wet with fear and shame. "Keep the cameras running," he said. Derek pulled him into the aisle. Isaiah walked rather than allowing himself to be dragged, protecting his knee and preventing tables from being overturned. Customers moved aside. No one intervened, but several raised their phones. That small change mattered. Fear had not disappeared. It had begun to lose its privacy. At the door, Derek shoved Isaiah between the shoulders. Isaiah caught the frame and remained upright. Cold rain struck his face. Outside, 2 local patrol cars were turning onto Main Street. Derek saw them and grew bolder. "Perfect timing," he said. "My father's people can finish this." Isaiah stepped onto the wet pavement. Derek followed, flanked by Trent and Kyle. "Get on your knees," Derek ordered. Isaiah looked at him. "No." Derek pushed him from behind. Isaiah allowed the forward motion to continue rather than turning with the force. One knee touched the pavement, and his palm met the ground before his weight fully dropped. Pain moved briefly through the reconstructed joint, sharp but manageable. Laughter came from Derek. Though his friends no longer joined him, Isaiah remained still for 1 second. He used that second to control the pain, slow his breathing, and decide how much longer restraint remained the safer choice. Then he rose. Rain ran along his face and gathered at his jaw. Derek's expression shifted when Isaiah stood to his full height. The older man did not look defeated. He looked as though he had completed an evaluation. "That is better," Derek said, forcing amusement back into his voice. "Now you understand how things work here." Isaiah brushed gravel from his palm. "I understand exactly how things work here. Then stay down next time. There will not be a next time." Derek stepped closer and pressed 2 fingers to Isaiah's chest. "My father runs this town." Isaiah's eyes moved toward the approaching patrol cars, then toward the highway. A deeper engine sound was beginning to rise beyond the rain. "That may be true," he said, "but he does not run the truth." Derek caught the front of Isaiah's coat once more. The distant engines grew louder. The first armored SUV entered the parking lot without slowing until its tires reached the line of spaces facing the diner. 3 more followed in close formation. Then 2 military transport vehicles turned in behind them, their dark frames filling the narrow lot and blocking the view from Main Street. Derek released Isaiah's coat, though he tried to make the movement look deliberate. Rainwater ran down his face as he watched uniformed personnel step from the vehicles. They wore tactical equipment because they were already prepared for deployment, but their weapons remained secured and pointed toward the ground. No one shouted. No one rushed. The soldiers spread out with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed more dangerous arrivals than this one. To Derek, the silence looked like obedience waiting for instructions. His confidence returned in a fragile wave. He straightened his jacket and stepped forward before anyone could ask what had happened. "Good timing," he called. "We've got a suspicious individual here near Fort Sterling." The nearest soldier looked at him without recognition and continued scanning the lot. Derek raised his voice. "I said I detained someone." The rear door of the lead SUV opened. General Adrian Cross stepped into the rain wearing a dark service coat over his uniform. At 63, Cross carried himself with the disciplined economy of a man who no longer needed to prove he commanded a room. The silver stars on his shoulders caught the gray morning light, and conversation inside the diner stopped completely. Cross had not come to Carter's Highway Grill because anyone had reported a disturbance. A winter storm had grounded the helicopter assigned to carry his team to the airfield, forcing the entire unit to travel by road. When a young operations officer spotted Isaiah's faded green pickup outside the diner, Cross had ordered the convoy to turn around. He had recognized the truck immediately. Isaiah had driven it to training sites, memorial services, and more than one meeting where everyone else arrived in government vehicles. Cross had expected to find him drinking coffee while waiting for roadside assistance. He had not expected to find him standing in the rain with mud on one knee and a torn sleeve hanging from his shoulder. Cross stopped after 2 steps. His eyes moved from Isaiah's damaged coat to Derek's clenched hand, then toward the diner windows crowded with witnesses. A flash of anger crossed his face, brief but unmistakable. Isaiah noticed it and gave the smallest shake of his head. It was not a request for rescue. It was a warning against acting before understanding. Cross continued forward. Derek positioned himself between the general and Isaiah. "Sir, I can explain. That man was causing trouble inside. He refused to identify himself, may have been carrying restricted materials, and became aggressive when we tried to remove him." Cross looked at Derek as though he were an obstacle someone had forgotten to clear. "Move." The single word stripped the performance from Derek's face. He stepped aside. Cross walked directly to Isaiah, brought his heels together, and raised his right hand in a precise salute. "Colonel Brooks, sir," he said. "We have been searching for you." Isaiah returned the salute, his movement calm despite the pain in his knee. "Vehicle trouble. My secure phone lost power." Cross lowered his hand. "Are you injured?" "No serious damage. Your coat suggests otherwise." Isaiah glanced at the coffee stain. Breakfast became unnecessarily complicated. A few soldiers exchanged looks. One of them, Captain Daniel Price, stared at Isaiah with restrained disbelief. He had studied after-action reports bearing Isaiah's name during advanced command training. In one operation, Isaiah had led a trapped team through an underground service route after communications failed and every planned exit was compromised. The report credited his memory and judgment with preventing a disaster. Price had imagined someone larger than life. The quiet man standing before him looked tired, wet, and completely in control. Derek heard the title colonel and searched for a way to preserve his dignity. "I didn't know who he was," he said. Cross turned slowly. "Would it have changed your conduct?" Derek opened his mouth but found no safe answer. Isaiah spoke before Cross could continue. "That is not the relevant question." He looked toward Derek, then at the people watching from inside. "My rank does not create a right that another man lacks." Cross understood immediately. His anger remained, but he contained it. "Tell me what happened," Derek tried to interrupt. "Sir, this is a local matter. Then local procedures should survive an accurate account." Cross looked toward Keisha, who had stepped beneath the diner awning with her phone still recording. "Did you witness the beginning?" Keisha nodded, but fear tightened her throat. "Yes, sir. Do not call me sir unless you want to. State what you saw in your own words." The simple invitation unsettled her almost as much as Derek's threats had. For years, authority in Red Valley had spoken first and expected agreement. Cross was doing the opposite. Keisha explained that Isaiah had been seated by staff, paid in advance, and remained calm while Derek questioned him and demanded the booth. She described the broken cup, the threats, and the forced removal. 2 customers confirmed her statement. Helen remained near the door, struggling with the knowledge that her silence had helped the situation grow. Derek's expression tightened as each witness spoke. Then he pulled out his phone. "My father is on his way. He'll clear this up." Isaiah looked toward the 2 patrol cars now entering the lot. "Your father may explain the local system," he said. "He will not be able to erase what happened here." Derek called Calvin anyway. While the phone rang, Cross noticed the small black case still visible through the diner window. "The field notebook?" he asked. Isaiah nodded. And the original access diagrams. Cross's face hardened with urgency. Then we have less time than I thought. Derek heard the exchange but understood none of it. He only understood that every soldier in the parking lot seemed to recognize Isaiah's importance, while the man himself appeared almost indifferent to it. A patrol car stopped near the entrance. Another vehicle approached behind it at higher speed. Isaiah watched the road and saw the official markings of the Red Valley Police Department. "That will be Chief Whitmore," Keisha said quietly. Derek lowered his phone and smiled again, though the expression no longer reached his eyes. "Now you'll see who has authority here." Isaiah turned toward the approaching vehicle. "Authority is about to be tested," he said. "That is not the same thing." Police Chief Calvin Whitmore arrived in a black department SUV, with its emergency lights flashing but no siren. He parked at an angle across two spaces, stepped into the rain, and surveyed the scene with the irritation of a property owner discovering strangers in his yard. 4 local officers followed in separate vehicles. Calvin was 59, broad through the shoulders, with close-cut gray hair and a face trained to appear reasonable in public. He saw the military convoy, the soldiers, General Cross, and Isaiah standing near his son. For one brief moment, caution entered his eyes. Then Derek hurried toward him. "Dad, he attacked me." Calvin placed one hand on Derek's shoulder and examined him with theatrical concern. "Are you hurt?" "My wrist." He twisted it. He was acting suspicious inside, and when I asked him to leave, he got aggressive. Calvin looked at Isaiah for the first time. His gaze lingered on the worn coat, mud-stained pants, and old pickup. He did not ask Isaiah what had happened. He did not ask why several customers were recording. He did not ask why a 4-star general stood beside him. "Sir," Calvin said, using the polite tone he reserved for people he had already decided to distrust, "place your hands where I can see them." Isaiah's hands were already visible. "They have been visible since before you arrived." Calvin's mouth tightened. "Do not make this difficult forward." "Chief Whitmore, Colonel Brooks has cooperated with every request made by legitimate authorities." Calvin turned toward him with a strained smile. "General, I respect your service, but this is Red Valley jurisdiction. My officers will determine what happened." "Then determine it," Cross replied. "Do not announce it before interviewing witnesses." The correction landed publicly, and Calvin did not appreciate public correction. He looked toward the diner entrance. "Who owns this establishment?" Helen raised her hand slightly. "I do. Was this man asked to leave?" Helen hesitated. Derek stared at her. Calvin watched her more closely than he watched Isaiah. "He was asked," she said finally, "but not because he caused trouble." Calvin's face remained composed. "That is not what I asked." Keisha stepped forward. "Derek caused the trouble. He demanded the booth, questioned Colonel Brooks, knocked over his coffee, and had him dragged outside." Calvin turned toward her. "And you are?" "Keisha Morgan. I work here. Did anyone ask for your statement?" "You said you were determining what happened." A few soldiers glanced at one another. Calvin took 2 steps closer. "Hand me the phone." Keisha held it against her chest. "Why? It may contain evidence." "Then you can request a copy." "I am requesting the device." "Do you have a warrant?" The question was respectful, but Calvin reacted as if she had insulted him. "You are interfering with an active investigation." Keisha's fear became visible. Her shoulders drew inward, and her breathing shortened, yet she did not surrender the phone. "I recorded what happened because Derek threatened us." Calvin looked toward Helen. "You allow employees to record customers without permission." Helen began to answer, but Isaiah spoke first. "You have questioned the black witness who recorded the event. You have not asked for the phones held by any of the white customers." Calvin faced him. "Do not turn this into something it is not. I have not needed to. Your conduct is doing that." The officers behind Calvin shifted uneasily. One young officer, Mark Ellis, activated his body camera with a subtle tap. Calvin pointed toward Isaiah's pickup. "We will search the vehicle and the case inside the diner." "On what basis?" Isaiah asked. "Your behavior near a military installation." Cross's expression sharpened. "His presence near Fort Sterling is authorized." Calvin ignored him. "Refusal to cooperate gives us probable cause." "No," Isaiah said. Refusal to surrender a constitutional right does not create probable cause. Calvin's composure began to fracture. He had expected fear, apology, or confusion. Isaiah gave him precise language and forced every improper order into the open. "Men like you always arrive with an attitude," Calvin said. "Then, when officers take precautions, you claim mistreatment." Silence moved across the parking lot. The phrase was not an explicit insult, but its meaning was clear. Isaiah's face remained still, though disappointment settled behind his eyes. "Which attitude?" he asked. "The one that refuses to lower its head?" Calvin's cheeks flushed. "The one that believes every rule is about race. Your son asked me questions he did not ask white customers. Your diner required my payment first. Your first instruction was directed at me before you interviewed anyone. You demanded the black witness's phone while ignoring every other recording. If this is not about race, explain the pattern without pretending it does not exist." Calvin looked around and saw that people were listening. Authority had always worked best for him in private. "Officer Ellis," he said, "detain him." The young officer did not move immediately. "Chief, we have not established an offense." Calvin turned sharply. "That was an order." Isaiah held out his hands, wrists together. "I will not resist. State the reason for detention clearly so every camera records it." Ellis swallowed. He reached slowly for his cuffs, but Cross raised one hand. "Before you proceed, Chief, understand that Military Legal Counsel is documenting this encounter, and state authorities have been notified." Calvin's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "It is information." Keisha's phone vibrated. She looked down and saw that the recording had finished uploading to cloud storage. A second notification confirmed it had been shared with her sister. Some of the tension left her face. Calvin noticed. "Give me the phone now. The video is already backed up." For the first time, genuine alarm crossed his features. He concealed it quickly by turning toward one of his officers. "Go inside. Shut down the security system and secure all recordings." Officer Ellis stared at him. "Shut it down. To preserve evidence. Turning it off would stop preservation." Calvin's voice hardened. "Do what I said." A woman's voice came from behind the line of vehicles. "He should not do that." Everyone turned. A dark sedan had stopped near the road. Special Agent Rachel Monroe stepped from the passenger side, followed by two state investigators. She held a document folder beneath her coat and looked directly at Calvin. "In fact," she continued, "no one from your department should touch another recording." Calvin's face changed by only a fraction, but Isaiah saw it. The chief did not recognize Rachel as a stranger. He recognized her as a problem he had hoped would never arrive in public. Rachel Monroe walked across the parking lot without hurrying. She was 44, dressed in a charcoal suit beneath a weatherproof coat, and carried herself with the controlled fatigue of someone who had spent months assembling a case, one reluctant witness at a time. Calvin watched her approach and attempted to recover his public smile. "Agent Monroe," he said, "I was not informed federal personnel were operating in my town. You were not supposed to be." Rachel stopped several feet away and opened the folder. "This investigation concerns potential public corruption, obstruction, civil rights violations, and manipulation of law enforcement records. Your department was deliberately excluded to prevent interference." Derek looked at his father. Calvin did not look back. "You are interrupting an active local investigation," he said. Rachel glanced toward Isaiah, whose hands remained extended but uncuffed. "What offense are you investigating?" "Assault, trespassing, suspicious activity near a military facility." "Which witness reported the assault?" Calvin gestured toward Derek. "The victim." Rachel looked at Derek's wrist. There was no swelling, no bruise, and no visible injury. "And the video?" "We were about to secure it." By shutting down the system, Calvin's jaw tightened. Rachel turned to Officer Ellis. "Has any evidence been altered since you arrived?" Ellis glanced at Calvin. The hesitation told Rachel enough. "Answer accurately," she said. "This is now part of a federal inquiry." "No evidence has been altered," Ellis replied. "The chief ordered us to turn off the cameras, but the order was not carried out." Calvin's expression hardened. Officer Ellis is confused. He appears unusually clear. Rachel handed a preservation order to one of the state investigators. "Serve this on the owner." All digital recordings, transaction records, and communications relating to today's incident are to remain intact. Helen accepted the document with shaking hands. Am I in trouble? Not for preserving evidence. Rachel's tone softened. But I need you to tell the truth, including anything you have been afraid to report. Helen looked toward Calvin. For years, that glance would have ended the conversation. This time she saw soldiers, investigators, customers with phones, Keisha standing beside her, and Isaiah waiting without pressure. Fear remained, but it no longer stood alone. I have been paying $600 every week, Helen said. Calvin's head snapped toward her. Be careful. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Do not address the witness, Helen continued, her voice unsteady. The money is called a safety contribution. If I miss a payment, inspections start. Permits get questioned. Patrol cars sit outside during lunch. I was told it was easier for everyone if I cooperated. Who told you? Chief Whitmore. Sometimes Derek collected it. Derek stepped back. That is a lie. Keisha raised her phone. I have heard him mention the envelope. Rachel asked her to send the uploaded video through an evidence link. Within minutes, an investigator received the file and confirmed the tamped. The recording captured Derek's demand for the booth, his questions about Isaiah's identity, the spilled coffee, the forced removal, and Calvin's order to seize the phone and shut down cameras. It also captured a phrase Calvin had used quietly enough to believe no one outside the nearest group could hear. The phrase reduced Isaiah and Keisha to a racial category and suggested they required firmer control. It was not the loudest statement of the morning, but it revealed the assumptions behind every decision. Calvin understood what the recording contained when he saw Rachel's expression. Private words taken out of context, he said. The surrounding conduct provides context, she replied. Rachel then explained that the diner incident had not created the investigation. For nearly 10 months, her team had reviewed traffic stop data showing black drivers were stopped at nearly 4 times the rate of comparable drivers on the same roads. More than 30 civil rights complaints had been closed without recorded interviews. Body camera files disappeared disproportionately from cases involving Derek. Business owners withdrew matching amounts of cash every Monday. Reports involving Derek were repeatedly rewritten after Calvin accessed them. We had patterns, Rachel said. We had financial records. We had former officers willing to speak privately. What we lacked was a public incident connecting your personal intervention, your son's conduct, witness intimidation, and an attempt to interfere with evidence. Calvin stared at her. You planned this? No. Your son selected a stranger and assumed no one would defend him. You arrived and demonstrated the system for us. One of Calvin's officers approached Rachel and handed her a small flash drive. I copied reports before they were changed, he said. I did not know who I could trust. Calvin's face lost color. You are finished in law enforcement. That decision is no longer yours, Rachel replied. A state investigator received a message and showed it to her. Calvin had sent a text minutes earlier, instructing a dispatcher to erase archived footage and remove a collection log from the station computer. Rachel read the message twice, then looked at Calvin. Police Chief Calvin Whitmore, you are under arrest for obstruction of an investigation and attempted destruction of evidence. Additional charges will be determined after the search. The handcuffs closed around Calvin's wrists without struggle. His authority did not disappear dramatically. It left him in small pieces. The officers who stopped obeying, the witnesses who raised their heads, and the son who suddenly looked at him not as protection, but as proof that protection had ended. Derek turned toward the city SUV. I'm leaving. 2 state officers blocked his path. Rachel informed him he was being detained in connection with assault, coercion, and witness intimidation. Derek looked toward Isaiah as though expecting triumph. Isaiah showed none. Cross approached with the black case retrieved from the diner. We need to move, he said quietly. Isaiah nodded, then looked at Calvin. Your badge did not create your character, he said. It revealed it. He turned to Helen and Keisha. Tell the truth completely. Do not protect me. Do not protect yourselves with half of it. Keisha nodded. Isaiah removed the ruined coat and accepted a dry field jacket from Captain Price. Less than 5 minutes later, he entered the lead vehicle beside General Cross. As the convoy pulled away from Carter's Highway Grill, the investigation in Red Valley was only beginning. For Isaiah, another clock had already started. Dr. Ethan Shaw had fewer than 24 hours before he disappeared across the Darsovian border. 12 hours after leaving Red Valley, Isaiah sat inside a military transport aircraft, studying a map of Black Ridge Station beneath a red cabin light. Snow covered the Darsovian mountains below, hiding roads, abandoned villages, and the concrete entrance built into the eastern slope. General Cross remained in the United States to coordinate intelligence and diplomatic clearance. Captain Daniel Price commanded the 12-person rescue team on the ground, but everyone understood why Isaiah sat at the center of the briefing table. The digital map showed 3 underground levels, a communications tower, a generator wing, and 2 vehicle exits. Isaiah examined it for less than a minute. "This is incomplete," he said. Price leaned closer. "Satellite updates were added 6 hours ago. The building is updated. The mountain is not." Isaiah pointed to a blank section below the east wing. "There is a drainage channel here. It was cut before the station was completed. The final plans omitted it because the rock was considered unstable. Can we enter through it? Possibly. But if the temperature dropped below 10 degrees, the outer section will be frozen." Price studied him. "And if it collapsed? Then we do not use it to leave." Intelligence estimated that more than 40 armed contractors occupied the station. They were preparing to move Ethan Shaw before dawn. A direct assault risked triggering demolition charges in the data room or forcing the captors to relocate him through the western tunnel. Isaiah proposed a quieter approach. 6 operators would enter through the drainage channel. A second team would create a controlled power failure near the southern relay station. The objective was not to defeat every guard. It was to make the facility uncertain long enough to extract Ethan and secure the data. The team landed beyond the mountain range and traveled by vehicle until the road became impassable. From there, they moved on foot through deep snow. Isaiah's reconstructed knee began to ache before the first mile ended. Captain Price noticed a slight change in his stride. "We can adjust the pace. The weather will not adjust with us," Isaiah replied. He did not deny the pain or pretend age had no cost. He simply managed it. At the drainage entrance, the metal grate was buried beneath ice. 2 operators prepared a cutting charge, but Isaiah stopped them. "The vibration will travel through the pipe." He ran one gloved hand along the frozen frame, found a corroded hinge beneath the snow, and used a compact hydraulic tool to separate it without an explosion. They entered single file. Inside, the tunnel narrowed until even the smallest operator had to turn sideways. Water moved beneath a skin of ice. Halfway through, Isaiah raised a fist. Everyone froze. A thin wire crossed the passage at ankle height. It connected to a homemade alarm built from metal fragments and an old sensor. Price stared at it. Their equipment had not detected it. Isaiah lowered himself carefully, cut the wire, and placed the pieces against the wall. "The people inside expect technology," he whispered. "So they used something technology would ignore." They emerged behind the lower generator room moments before the second team interrupted the external power supply. Emergency lights activated, covering the corridors in a dull amber glow. Isaiah led them through a maintenance passage that appeared sealed on the digital plan. He counted doorways from memory and stopped at a ventilation shaft. Through the metal, he heard a repeated scraping sound followed by 3 taps. "Ethan," he said. Price listened but heard only machinery. Isaiah knew Ethan's habits. Years earlier, they had agreed that 3 taps, a pause, and 2 taps meant conscious but restrained. The holding room lay 1 floor above, not in the cell block intelligence had identified. 2 guards approached from the stairwell. Isaiah signaled the team back into shadow. When the first guard passed, Isaiah controlled his arm, covered his mouth, and lowered him silently. Another operator restrained the second. Neither guard suffered more than temporary pain. The team reached the holding room and found Ethan secured to a chair, exhausted but alert. Relief moved across his face when he saw Isaiah. "Up," Ethan whispered, apparently not successfully. Before they could leave, The facility commander appeared at the far end of the corridor with several contractors. He pulled Ethan against him and held a weapon close to Ethan's side. Price's team took cover. The commander ordered them to surrender the recovered data drive. Isaiah looked at the emergency light above the man, the reflective panel on an equipment cabinet, and the steam escaping from a damaged pipe. "You came too far for one man," the commander said. "No," Isaiah replied. "We came exactly far enough." He shifted the small metal inspection mirror attached to his glove. Light from the emergency lamp reflected into the commander's eyes. The distraction lasted less than a second. Ethan dropped his weight as Isaiah had taught him years before. Price fired a controlled shot into the weapon, knocking it from the commander's hand, while two operators closed the distance and restrained him. No one celebrated. An alarm began pulsing through the station. Demolition charges had been activated in the data wing. The team moved toward the eastern exit, carrying Ethan between them. A support beam collapsed behind the final group and trapped a young operator beneath a section of metal framework. Price ordered evacuation before the passage failed completely. Isaiah turned back. "Colonel, we have seconds," Price called. "Then use them." Isaiah entered the unstable corridor, lifted one side of the frame while another operator pulled the trapped soldier free and guided him toward the exit. The ceiling cracked above them. Snow and concrete filled the passage just as Isaiah crossed the threshold. Outside, the team moved down the slope, while a controlled section of Black Ridge Station collapsed behind them. Ethan looked at Isaiah's borrowed field jacket and noticed the old coffee stain still visible on the shirt beneath it. "What happened to you before this?" he asked. Isaiah looked back at the mountain. "I stopped for breakfast." For the first time since his capture, Ethan laughed. By sunrise, the rescue aircraft was airborne. Ethan was safe, the stolen data had been recovered, and every member of the team was returning home. 10 months later, Isaiah Brooks returned to Red Valley without a military convoy. He drove the same faded green pickup, now repaired, along Main Street beneath a clear autumn sky. The town looked familiar at first glance. The courthouse remained in the center. Flags still moved above the storefronts. Carter's Highway Grill still carried the same red neon sign. The changes appeared only when someone knew where to look. No patrol vehicle sat outside businesses for hours without explanation. The Police Association donation box had disappeared from the diner counter. A sign at the station announced that body camera footage was stored through an independent state system. Complaints involving officers were reviewed by a civilian board that included representatives from several neighborhoods. The transformation had not occurred because one powerful man arrived and solved everything. It had happened because the investigation gave frightened people a safe moment to speak, and they chose not to waste it. Calvin Whitmore's trial lasted 6 weeks. Financial records, altered reports, recorded threats, and testimony from former officers established a pattern extending across most of his 17 years in command. He was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison for extortion, obstruction, falsifying official records, misuse of authority, and civil rights violations. Derek received 9 years after prosecutors reopened cases involving reckless driving, property damage, intimidation, assault, and unauthorized use of city vehicles. His 2 friends cooperated with investigators and received reduced sentences for their roles in removing Isaiah from the diner. Neither Calvin nor Derek lost everything because they had challenged a decorated officer. They lost their freedom because they had harmed ordinary people for years and believed those people would remain silent. Carter's Highway Grill had also changed. Helen Carter sold part of the business to Keisha Morgan, who became the operating manager. Helen remained involved, but she no longer made every decision alone. The town returned a portion of the money collected through the false safety fund, and the diner used it to repair the kitchen, improve staff wages, and install a transparent complaint policy. More important than the renovations was a rule printed at the top of every training sheet. No customer would be asked to prepay, show identification, change seats, or accept additional scrutiny because of race, clothing, income, or perceived social status. When Isaiah entered, the breakfast crowd recognized him. Conversation softened, and several people began to stand. He lifted one hand. "Please keep eating." Keisha came from behind the counter. Her confidence had changed. She no longer apologized before speaking, and she no longer glanced toward the window whenever a patrol car passed. "Booth 3 is open," she said. Isaiah looked toward it. The vinyl had been replaced, but the booth remained beside the same window. A small framed photograph hung nearby, showing the diner staff and several residents at a public meeting where the reform plan had been approved. There was no photograph of Isaiah saluting General Cross. Keisha had decided the lesson should not depend on celebrity. Isaiah sat down and placed his old black case beside him. "Black? Eggs, toast, and potatoes?" A faint smile reached his face. "You remembered. Some mornings are difficult to forget." Helen approached slowly. She looked healthier, though regret remained in the way she held her hands together. "Colonel Brooks, I owe you an apology." Isaiah waited. "I judged you before you spoke," she continued. "I asked Keisha to charge you first. I stayed quiet when Derek confronted you because I was afraid of Calvin. Fear explains what I did, but it does not make it right." Isaiah studied her expression. The apology did not contain excuses disguised as reasons. "What did you change?" he asked. Helen glanced around the diner. "The policies, the ownership, the way we train people, and the way I respond when I see something wrong." Isaiah nodded. "Then the apology has substance." Keisha brought the coffee. "We wanted to name the booth after you." "Do not. I thought you might say that. A seat should not require a famous name before everyone is allowed to use it." Near the entrance, a plaque displayed the words, "Dignity does not begin with rank. It belongs to every person who enters." Isaiah read it twice, then looked at Keisha. "That is better than my name." During breakfast, people approached only when invited. Officer Mark Ellis, now serving under a newly appointed chief from outside Red Valley, thanked Isaiah for forcing him to decide whether loyalty meant obeying a person or honoring an oath. Isaiah corrected him gently. "I did not force the decision. Calvin did. You simply stopped avoiding it." Rachel Monroe arrived near the end of the meal. She had been invited to speak at the town's first annual Public Integrity Forum. "You could have told me you were coming," she said. "Then someone might have arranged another convoy." Rachel smiled. "How is Ethan?" "Recovering. Complaining that retirement is boring." "And you?" Isaiah looked at the ordinary activity around him. Coffee being poured, orders called toward the kitchen, customers taking whichever seats were available. "I am learning to appreciate boring." When the check arrived, Isaiah placed $150 beneath the cup. Keisha returned most of it. "Your meal is $12. The cup Derek broke cost $6. We are not accepting the rest. Use it for staff training." The town already funded that. Isaiah considered her answer, then accepted the returned money. It was another kind of progress. She no longer believed gratitude required surrendering a boundary. Before leaving, Isaiah paused beside the entrance plaque. He thought about Black Ridge Station, Calvin's badge on the pavement, Derek's hand twisted in his coat, and the silence of a room full of frightened witnesses. His strength had allowed him to survive dangerous places. It had not created his dignity. That had existed before any uniform, title, or salute. Outside, he looked back through the window. Booth 3 was already occupied by another traveler who knew nothing about its history. No one asked the traveler to move. Isaiah smiled and continued toward his truck. Some victories were not announced by generals or courtrooms. Sometimes they were visible in an ordinary person being allowed to sit, eat, and exist without first proving that he mattered. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share which moment changed the way you saw Isaiah's restraint. Tell us where you are watching from and whether you believe Red Valley truly learned its lesson.